The sleek black town car pulled to a stop in front of what could only be described as the smallest excuse for a grocery store William Calloway had ever seen. And he had seen plenty of things in his 32 years of life, most of them from behind the bulletproof windows of luxury vehicles, just like this one. "This cannot be it," he said, staring at the weathered wooden sign that read Maple Ridge General Store in hand-painted letters that had clearly seen better decades. His assistant Marcus checked his phone for the third time. According to the GPS, this is the only commercial establishment within 20 miles that sells basic necessities. The nearest proper supermarket is 45 minutes away. William rubbed his temples, feeling the beginning of what promised to be a magnificent headache. 2 weeks. He had to survive 2 weeks in this God-forsaken corner of Vermont, while the acquisition of Hartford Manufacturing went through. The company's founder, Robert Hartford, had been peculiarly stubborn about one condition. William had to spend time in Maple Ridge, see the factory, meet the workers, understand what the company meant to the community. It was the most ridiculous stipulation William had ever encountered in 15 years of running Calloway Industries. But Hartford Manufacturing's specialized production techniques were worth billions, and if humoring an old man's sentimentality was the price, so be it. The lakeside cabin his team had rented was apparently stocked with nothing but dust and potentially several generations of spiders. Hence the grocery store. "Wait here," William said, straightening his Tom Ford suit jacket and stepping out into air so clean it almost hurt to breathe. The September afternoon sun felt different here, softer somehow, filtering through trees that had probably been standing since before his company had built its first skyscraper. A bell chimed above the door as he entered, the sound oddly cheerful. The store's interior was cramped and smelled like wood polish and something baking. Narrow aisles were packed with everything from canned goods to fishing lures, with absolutely no discernible organizing principle that William could detect. "Be right with you." A voice called from somewhere in the back. William began navigating the maze, grabbing items at random. Bread, coffee, something that claimed to be organic pasta sauce. He was examining a package of allegedly fresh chicken when he heard footsteps approaching. "Sorry about that. I was just pulling cookies out of the oven. We make them fresh every afternoon because Mrs. Patterson insists her grandson can only eat them still warm, even though he is 23 years old and perfectly capable of heating them himself. But who am I to argue with tradition?" William turned and found himself face to face with a woman in a green apron dusted with flour, her dark blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail that had mostly given up, with several strands framing a face that was all warm brown eyes and a genuinely friendly smile. "Can I help you find anything? You look a bit lost, which is fair because my organization system makes sense to exactly one person, and that person is me." "I can see that," William said, glancing at a shelf where motor oil sat next to maple syrup. The woman laughed, a real laugh that crinkled the corners of her eyes. I know, but there is a method to my madness. The motor oil is there because Jim Carson always buys both on Thursdays, and this way he saves himself a trip down another aisle. He has a bad hip. You arrange your entire store around one customer's shopping habits. Around all of their habits, actually. I know everyone in this town and what they need. Makes shopping faster for them, and it makes my day more interesting. I am Julia Kinsley, by the way. Owner, manager, and currently only employee since my part-timer is out with the flu. She extended a hand and William shook it automatically. Her grip was firm, her palm slightly rough. These were hands that worked. William Calloway. Something flickered in her expression, but it vanished so quickly he might have imagined it. "Well, William Calloway, what brings you to Maple Ridge? We do not get many visitors this time of year. Summer tourists are gone, and it is too early for leaf peepers." "Business," he said shortly, not wanting to explain. "I am staying at a rental property on the lake." "Oh, the Morrison cabin. That place is lovely. Great view, though the water heater is temperamental. You have to jiggle the handle on the left after you turn it on, otherwise it just makes this horrible grinding noise and produces no hot water whatsoever." "How could you possibly know which cabin I am renting?" Julia grinned. "It is the only rental property on the lake. The Harrisons rent out their place too, but that is on the pond on the east side of town, not the lake. Different body of water entirely. Also, Mrs. Morrison mentioned someone from New York was renting it for a couple weeks." Word travels fast around here. William felt suddenly exposed, like his privacy had been stripped away without his consent. In Manhattan, he could walk down Fifth Avenue and no one would give him a second glance unless they recognized him from Forbes or the business section of the Times. Here, apparently, his presence was community news. "I will need groceries for 2 weeks," he said, steering the conversation back to practical matters. Julia's expression shifted, becoming more businesslike, though the warmth never quite left her eyes. "Okay, do you cook?" "I have people who cook." "But here, do you cook?" William paused. "I can manage basic meals." "That sounds like a generous assessment of your abilities, but I will take you at your word. Let me help you. The chicken you are holding expired yesterday. I was about to pull it." "Here, this one is fresh from Miller's farm, brought in this morning." She moved through the store with easy confidence, pulling items and explaining them. "This bread is from Sarah Chen's bakery. She delivers twice a week. These eggs are better than anything you will get in the city. The produce is limited this time of year, but everything is local. This cheese will change your life. I am not exaggerating even a little bit." Despite himself, William was drawn into her enthusiasm. She talked about food the way he talked about quarterly earnings, with passion and precise knowledge. Within 20 minutes, she had assembled a collection of groceries that looked nothing like what he would have chosen, and somehow exactly like what he needed. "You do not have any fresh herbs," she said, frowning slightly. "Hold on." She disappeared through a back door and returned with a small pot containing a vibrant green plant. "Basil from my garden. Keep it on the windowsill, water it when the soil feels dry. Pinch off the leaves from the top when you need them. It makes everything taste better." "I cannot take your plant." "Sure you can. I have 6 more at home. Consider it a welcome gift." The register was old-fashioned, the kind that required manual entry of each item's price. Julia's fingers flew over the keys with practiced speed. "That will be $73.42. William handed over his black American Express card. Julia looked at it, then at him, then back at the card. "Our machine does not actually process cards. Cash or check only. Sorry." "There is an ATM at the gas station about 3 miles down Route 7, if you need it. You run a business in this century without accepting credit cards. The fees cut too much into my margins, and everyone around here knows to bring cash or their checkbook." Obviously, I should have mentioned it earlier, but like I said, we do not get many out-of-town visitors. William stared at the pile of groceries, then at his wallet, which contained perhaps $40 in cash. He never carried cash. What was the point when cards worked everywhere? Except apparently here. "I do not have enough cash on me." Julia bit her lip, thinking. "Okay, how much do you have?" $40. "Right. Take what you absolutely need for tonight and come back tomorrow with cash for the rest. I will hold these other items for you." It was a reasonable solution. It was also deeply embarrassing in a way William had not experienced since he was a teenager trying to impress a date with a wallet full of nearly expired gift cards. Julia seemed to sense his discomfort, because her voice gentled. Honestly, it happens more often than you would think. Last month, a couple from Boston tried to buy $100 worth of camping supplies and had the same problem. You are in good company. She helped him select the essentials, reducing his purchase to exactly $40 worth of groceries. As she bagged them in paper bags that looked like they might have been around since the store opened, she said, "The farmer's market is tomorrow morning in the town square. Cash only there too, just as a heads up, but the produce is incredible if you want to supplement what I have here." "I will keep that in mind," William said, though he had no intention of visiting a farmer's market. He would send Marcus. Except when he returned to the car and explained the situation, Marcus informed him that he would be driving back to New York that night to handle an emergency at the office. "I will be back in 3 days," Marcus said. "You can survive that long without supervision, right? You are a grown man who runs a multi-billion-dollar company. I am not sure those skills translate to surviving in the wilderness. Maple Ridge has a population of 2,000 people. It is not the wilderness. It is barely rural." After Marcus left, William found himself alone in the cabin with his inadequate groceries, and the growing realization that the next 2 weeks were going to be far more challenging than he had anticipated. He managed to make pasta with the sauce Julia had recommended, and she had not been wrong about the cheese. It was extraordinary. He ate standing at the window, watching the sun set over the lake in shades of orange and pink that seemed impossible, like someone had oversaturated a photograph. His phone buzzed with emails, each one representing a crisis that needed his attention. He responded mechanically, part of his mind still on the conversation in the store, on Julia's laugh and her obvious pride in her strange little business. The next morning, William woke to the sound of loons calling across the water. For a moment he forgot where he was, reaching for his phone to check the time. 6:30. In New York, he would already be on his second coffee reviewing reports. Here, the world felt slower, quieter, almost suspended. He made coffee with the grounds Julia had sold him, and that was also surprisingly excellent. The cabin had no television, limited internet, and cell service that came and went like an unreliable friend. It should have been maddening. Instead, it was just strange. He drove into town around 9, following the hand-drawn map the rental company had provided. Maple Ridge's downtown consisted of one main street lined with brick buildings that looked original to the town's founding. There was a hardware store, a diner, a bookshop, the post office, and a town square where white tents were set up in neat rows. The farmer's market. William parked and walked over, drawn by curiosity more than need. The market was busier than he expected, filled with people who all seemed to know each other. Conversations flowed between vendors and customers, punctuated by laughter and the occasional bark from a dog. He was examining a display of apples when he heard Julia's voice. "William, you made it." She was standing behind a table loaded with jars of honey, preserves, and what looked like fresh pasta. Her hair was down today, falling in waves past her shoulders, and she wore jeans and a soft blue sweater that matched the morning sky. "I did not realize you sold here too," he said, walking over. "Just the specialty items. The pasta is my own recipe. I make it in the kitchen behind the store. The honey is from the hives I keep on my property, and the preserves are from whatever fruit I can get my hands on. It is a hobby that got out of hand. You make pasta from scratch, keep bees, and run a store. When do you sleep?" Julia laughed. "Sleep is overrated. Besides, I love all of it, every single part. Did you survive your first night in the cabin?" "The water heater made the grinding noise you predicted. But you figured out the handle trick, eventually. Then you are doing better than the last person who rented it. Mr. Morrison got a very angry phone call about broken plumbing that turned out to be user error. A customer approached to buy honey, and William stepped aside, watching Julia work. She was completely different from anyone in his usual world. No designer clothes, no calculated networking, no agenda that he could detect. She was just genuinely enthusiastic about honey and homemade pasta, greeting each customer like a friend because apparently they were friends. When there was a lull, Julia turned back to him. "Have you gotten anything to eat yet? Because if not, you need to try the apple cider donuts from the Chen's booth. Sarah's husband makes them every Saturday, and they are worth whatever premium your cardiologist would charge. I had not planned on staying long. You are already here. Might as well enjoy it. Come on, I will introduce you." Before he could protest, Julia was waving to a woman at a nearby table to watch her booth, then guiding William through the market. She introduced him to Sarah, whose donuts were indeed incredible, then to the farmer who grew the apples, to the woman who made goat cheese, to a man who carved intricate bird houses from reclaimed wood. Everyone greeted Julia with obvious affection, and everyone regarded William with friendly curiosity. He should have felt uncomfortable, but Julia's ease was contagious, and he found himself relaxing in a way he rarely did, even in his own apartment. "You are good at this," he said as they walked back to her booth. "At what? Connecting people, building community," Julia shrugged. "It is just how things work here. Everyone knows everyone. We take care of each other. It is not like the city where you can be anonymous." "Anonymity has its advantages. So does belonging," Julia said quietly. "I lived in Boston for 4 years during college. I know what it is like to be surrounded by millions of people and still feel completely alone. That is not living. That is just existing. Some people prefer existing without complications. And some people do not know what they are missing until they find it." There was something in her eyes when she said it, a gentle challenge that made William want to argue and agree simultaneously. Before he could respond, a man approached the booth asking about bulk orders for pasta, and Julia shifted back into business mode. William bought a jar of honey and 3 packages of fresh pasta, paying cash this time. As Julia bagged his purchases, she said, "The town does a potluck dinner every other Thursday at the community center. The next one is in 5 days. You should come. I do not think that is my type of event. Have you ever been to a small town potluck? No. Then how do you know it is not your type of event?" She had a point, though he was reluctant to admit it. "I would not know what to bring. Bring wine. Everyone always forgets to bring enough wine. 7 o'clock, community center next to the library. You cannot miss it because there are only like 5 buildings total in that area." William found himself agreeing, though he could not have explained why. Maybe it was the way Julia smiled when he said yes, like she had won something. Maybe it was the strange pull he felt toward this town that should have felt alien and instead felt oddly comfortable. Over the next few days, William fell into an unexpected rhythm. Mornings were spent at the Hartford manufacturing facility, reviewing processes and meeting with the management team. The factory was impressive, producing specialized automotive parts with precision that justified the acquisition price. Robert Hartford himself gave William a tour, explaining each step with obvious pride. "These people are not just employees," Robert said, gesturing to the workers. "They are my neighbors. I coach their kids in Little League. I go to their weddings and their funerals. This company is not just about profit. It is about taking care of this community." "Calloway Industries has excellent benefit programs," William said. "Your employees will be well taken care of." "That is not the same thing, and you know it." William did know it, though he did not want to acknowledge the difference. In his world, business was business. Efficiency, profit margins, shareholder value. Personal relationships were complications that mudded decision-making. Afternoons he spent working from the cabin, dealing with conference calls and emails while the lake sparkled outside his window. And somehow, most evenings, he found himself driving into town. Sometimes he would go to the general store for supplies he may or may not actually need. Julia always had time to talk, even when she was busy with inventory or customer orders. She told him about growing up in Maple Ridge, about leaving for college convinced she would never return, then coming back after her father died and discovering she could not imagine living anywhere else. The store was his, she explained one evening as she was closing up. He ran it for 37 years. Everyone said I should sell it, that there was no future in small retail, but I could not let it go. Too many memories, too much history. So I updated what I could, kept what made it special, and figured out how to make it work. Is it profitable? William asked. Enough. I am not getting rich, but I have everything I need. A home I own, food I grow, work I love. That is wealth too, is it not? It should have sounded naive. Instead, it sounded revolutionary, like she had figured out something essential that everyone else had missed. Thursday arrived, and William found himself standing outside the community center, holding 2 bottles of wine that the liquor store owner had assured him were appropriate for a potluck. He felt ridiculous in his casual clothes, jeans and a button-down that was probably still too formal, but it was the most relaxed outfit he owned. The center was loud with conversation and laughter. Long tables were covered with dishes, everything from casseroles to salads to desserts. There must have been 100 people crowded into the space, and William recognized several from the farmer's market. Julia spotted him immediately and navigated through the crowd to his side. She wore a green dress that brought out the color in her eyes, and her hair was in a French braid. "You came," she said, and her obvious delight made him glad he had. "I brought wine." "Perfect. Come on, let me introduce you properly." The next hour was a blur of names and faces. Julia pulled him from group to group, providing context that made each person memorable. This was the teacher who coached the high school debate team to state championships. This was the nurse who had delivered half the babies in town. This was the veteran who organized the annual Memorial Day parade. William was used to networking events where everyone wanted something from him, investment or partnership or just proximity to power. This was different. These people were curious about him but not impressed by him, which was oddly refreshing. He ended up at a table with Julia, Robert Hartford, and a few other locals, eating casserole that was far better than it had any right to be. The conversation ranged from town politics to the upcoming Harvest Festival, and William found himself actually contributing, offering an opinion about the community center's aging heating system. "You know about HVAC systems?" Robert asked, surprised. "I know about infrastructure efficiency. Before Calloway Industries focused on acquisitions, my grandfather built his fortune in construction. I grew up understanding how buildings work." "Huh," Robert said, exchanging a look with Julia that William could not quite read. After dinner, some people cleared the tables while others brought out instruments. A fiddle, a guitar, a banjo. Someone started playing and couples began to dance. Julia was pulled onto the floor by an older gentleman who turned out to be her former high school principal. She moved with easy grace, laughing at something he said. William watched from the sidelines, nursing his wine. When the song ended, Julia came over, slightly breathless. "You do not dance, not to fiddle music. Have you ever tried?" "No, seems to be a pattern with you." "How do you know what you like if you never try anything?" The fiddle player started a slower song and Julia extended her hand. "Come on, I will teach you. It is not complicated. Against his better judgment, William let her lead him onto the floor. She placed his hand on her waist, took his other hand in hers, and started to move. "Just follow the rhythm," she said. "Do not overthink it." Overthinking was William's default setting, but there was something about the music and the warmth of Julia's hand in his that made it easier to let go. He stepped on her foot once, but she just laughed and adjusted their pace. "See, you are a natural. I am objectively terrible at this, but you are doing it anyway. That is what matters." They danced through another song, and William became aware of how close they were, how easily they moved together once he stopped fighting it. Julia smelled like vanilla and honey, and when she looked up at him, her eyes were soft. "Thank you for coming tonight," she said. "I know this probably is not your scene. It is growing on me. Maple Ridge has that effect on people. I think you have that effect on people." The words came out before he could stop them, more honest than he had intended. Julia's expression shifted, surprise giving way to something warmer, and William felt the moment stretch between them, full of possibility. Then someone called Julia's name, needing her for something, and the spell broke. She squeezed his hand apologetically before disappearing into the crowd, leaving William on the edge of the dance floor wondering what exactly was happening to him. He left soon after, driving back to the cabin with his mind spinning. This was not the plan. The plan was to endure 2 weeks in Maple Ridge, finalize the acquisition, and return to his real life. Getting attached to the town was not part of the strategy. Getting attached to Julia was definitely not part of the strategy. But as he lay in bed that night, listening to the lake and the wind in the trees, William could not stop thinking about the way Julia had felt in his arms, the way she looked at him like he was a puzzle worth solving. The next morning, he woke to his phone ringing. It was Marcus with updates about the acquisition. There were complications, concerns from the board about Hartford Manufacturing's debt-to-equity ratio, questions about whether the purchase price was justified. "Maybe we should walk away," Marcus said. "There are other opportunities that make more financial sense." William looked out at the lake, thinking about Robert Hartford's pride in his factory, about the workers he had met, about what this company meant to Maple Ridge. "No," he said. "This acquisition is sound. Have the finance team run the numbers again. Factor in the proprietary technology and the skilled workforce. This is a good deal. Since when do you care about skilled workforce beyond productivity metrics? Since he had spent time in a place where people were not just numbers on a spreadsheet. Since he had met someone who saw value in things that could not be quantified. Just run the numbers, William said. He spent the morning working through projections and reports, building a case for the acquisition that would satisfy the board. It took hours of analysis, but he found what he needed. Hartford Manufacturing was not just viable, it was a strategic asset that would position Calloway Industries perfectly for the emerging electric vehicle market. By afternoon, he needed a break. He drove into town and found himself at the general store. Julia was rearranging a display of canned goods, and she lit up when she saw him. "Hey, how are you recovering from last night? Did I scare you off with my aggressive dance instruction?" "I have faced hostile takeovers that were less intimidating," she laughed. "Good. Then you will not be scared by what I am about to propose. Tomorrow is the Harvest Festival. The whole town participates. There are games, food competitions, a pie auction. It is extremely wholesome and corny, and you absolutely have to come. I have work to do. It is Saturday. Even ruthless businessmen take Saturdays off. I am not ruthless." Julia raised an eyebrow. "Really? Because I have been reading about you. Calloway Industries is famous for aggressive acquisitions and corporate restructuring. You have a reputation." William went still. "You researched me." "Of course I did. A stranger shows up in town asking about the Hartford factory right when everyone knows Robert is selling. I may live in a small town, but I am not naive. What else did you find out? That you are brilliant at business, that you have built an empire, that you are known for being fair but uncompromising, that you value efficiency over sentiment. Julia's tone was careful, neutral. Is that accurate? It was, William said slowly. But things are more complicated when you actually know the people involved. Robert Hartford is banking on that. That is why he made you come here, is it not? He wants you to see Maple Ridge as more than just an asset on a balance sheet. It is working. Julia smiled, but there was something sad in it. So what happens after the acquisition? You go back to New York and this place becomes a line item in your quarterly reports. I do not know, William admitted. I have not figured that part out yet. They stood in the narrow aisle of the general store, surrounded by maple syrup and motor oil, and William felt the weight of choices he had not yet made. His life was in New York. His company, his apartment, his entire identity was built around that world. Maple Ridge was a temporary detour, nothing more, except it was starting to feel like something more. Come to the festival tomorrow, Julia said softly. Figure out the rest later. So he went. The Harvest Festival transformed the town square into something out of a Norman Rockwell painting. Booths offered everything from face painting to apple bobbing. A small stage hosted a baking competition judged by a panel of very serious-looking elderly women. Children ran everywhere, hopped up on cider and candy. Julia found him near the entrance and grabbed his hand without hesitation. Okay, you have to try the fried dough, enter the pumpkin carving contest with me, and bid on at least one pie in the auction. Those are the rules. I did not agree to any rules. Too late. You are already here, which means you are participating. Come on. She pulled him from booth to booth, explaining traditions and introducing him to even more people. William bought fried dough that was absurdly unhealthy and delicious. He carved a pumpkin with Julia's guidance, producing something that vaguely resembled a cat if you squinted. Their entry did not win, but Julia declared it a moral victory. The pie auction was surprisingly competitive. People bid with genuine passion for apple and pumpkin, and something called maple bourbon pecan that made Julia whistle low. Sarah Chen made that one, she whispered to William. It is legendary. People plan their budgets around this. William bid on an apple pie and won at $25, which seemed reasonable until Julia informed him that the money went to fund the community center. That is a charitable donation, not a pie purchase, he said. It is both. You get pie, the community center gets new equipment. Everyone wins. They ate slices of his pie sitting on a bench near the stage, watching the sun dip toward the horizon. The pie was exceptional, buttery and perfectly spiced, and William could not remember the last time he had eaten something without simultaneously checking his phone. Can I ask you something? Julia said, her tone shifting to something more serious. Of course. Why are you really here? I know it is about the acquisition, but you could have sent someone else. You are the CEO. You do not have to personally oversee every deal. William considered his answer carefully. Robert Hartford insisted. He said if I wanted his company, I had to understand what it meant to Maple Ridge. At first, I thought it was a negotiation tactic. Now I think he just wanted me to see what I would be responsible for. And what do you see? A community that functions like a family. People who care about each other in ways that do not make economic sense but make every other kind of sense. A way of life that is not efficient or scalable but seems to make people genuinely happy. Julia was quiet for a moment, then said, My father used to say that not everything worth having can be measured. Some things you just have to feel. That is not how I have built my career. Maybe that is why you look so tired all the time. The observation stung because it was true. William worked 70-hour weeks, slept 5 hours a night, and considered vacation days a sign of weakness. He was successful by every measurable standard and exhausted in ways he rarely admitted. "I do not know how to be any other way," he said finally. Julia turned to face him fully, her expression serious. "That is the saddest thing I have ever heard." Before William could respond, someone called Julia over to help with cleanup. She hesitated, clearly torn, then squeezed his arm gently. "Stay. Watch the bonfire. They light it at dusk, and it is beautiful." She disappeared into the crowd, and William stayed. The bonfire was indeed beautiful, flames leaping high while people gathered around singing songs he did not know but found himself humming along to anyway. He thought about what Julia had said, about his admission that he did not know how to be different. The truth was scarier than that. He was starting to want to be different, but had no idea if it was even possible. The following week passed in a strange blur. William worked during the days, but his evenings increasingly belonged to Maple Ridge. He had dinner at the diner, and found himself in conversations with locals who treated him less like an outsider and more like someone who might stick around. He helped Julia close the store one night when her part-timer was still sick, learning the elaborate process of balancing the register and arranging special orders. "You are surprisingly competent at this," Julia said, watching him stack boxes in the storage room. "I did not always have people to do everything for me. My grandfather believed in understanding every aspect of a business from the ground up. I spent summers during college working in warehouses and on construction sites. So underneath the expensive suits, you actually know how to work with your hands. I remember how. Whether I am any good at it anymore is debatable." Julia hopped up to sit on the counter, studying him. "You are different than I expected." "What did you expect?" "I do not know. Someone colder, maybe. More corporate. You have this reputation as this genius businessman who makes decisions based purely on logic and profit. But you are here eating pie at harvest festivals and helping me stock shelves. Maybe your town is corrupting me. Or maybe you are finally relaxing enough to be yourself." The words hung in the air between them. William found himself moving closer, drawn by something he could not name. Julia watched him approach, her eyes wide but not afraid. "Julia," he started, then stopped, not knowing what he wanted to say. She reached out and touched his cheek, a gesture so gentle it made his chest ache. "You do not have to figure everything out right now. It is okay to just be present." "I am not good at being present." "Then practice." So he did. He kissed her softly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, she wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with an enthusiasm that made his knees weak. She tasted like the peppermint tea she had been drinking and something sweet he could not identify. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Julia was smiling. "I have wanted to do that since you first walked into my store looking completely lost." "I was not lost. You absolutely were, but it is okay. I like solving puzzles, and you, William Calloway, are the most interesting puzzle I have encountered in a very long time." They closed up the store together, and William walked Julia to her car, holding her hand because apparently that was something he did now. When she drove away, he stood in the empty parking lot feeling like his entire world had shifted on its axis. The next morning, Marcus called with news. The board had approved the acquisition with one condition: significant restructuring at the Hartford facility. They wanted workforce reductions, modernization that would eliminate 40% of current positions, consolidation of operations. "It is standard," Marcus said. "The numbers work better this way. You know that." William did know that. He also knew what those job cuts would mean to Maple Ridge. 40% of the Hartford workforce was nearly 200 people in a town of 2,000. It would be devastating. Tell the board I need time to review alternative structures. There are no alternative structures, William. This is the only way the deal makes financial sense. Then give me a week to find one. He spent 3 days locked in the cabin running models, exploring scenarios, looking for any path that preserved jobs while still satisfying the board's financial requirements. He ignored calls, skipped meals, and barely slept. The numbers were unforgiving. Every model showed the same result. Significant cuts were necessary. Unless the idea came to him at 2 in the morning while he was staring at production efficiency reports. Hartford Manufacturing had valuable technology, but was using it to produce a limited range of products. If they expanded into adjacent markets, particularly the growing renewable energy sector, they could increase revenue without increasing workforce. It would require investment, vision, and patience to see returns. It would also require him to care more about Maple Ridge's future than quarterly profits. William built the proposal meticulously, crafting arguments he knew would resonate with the board. He framed it as strategic positioning, long-term value creation, market leadership. He did not mention that he was doing this because he had danced with Julia Kinsley at a community potluck and realized that some things mattered more than efficiency. He sent the proposal to Marcus with instructions to schedule an emergency board meeting. Then he drove into town to find Julia. She was at the farmer's market, her usual Saturday routine. When she saw him, her face lit up in a way that made everything he had just put at risk feel absolutely worth it. "You look terrible," she said, reaching up to touch the circles under his eyes. "Have you slept?" "Not much." "I need to tell you something." Julia's expression shifted to concern. "Okay, let me pack up and we can go somewhere private." They ended up at her house, a small cottage on the edge of town with a garden that was preparing for winter and a view of the mountains. Inside was cozy and lived in, full of books and plants and personality. Julia made tea while William paced her kitchen, trying to organize his thoughts. "The acquisition is happening," he said finally. "The board approved it, but they want massive workforce reductions. Nearly 200 jobs cut from the factory." Julia went very still. "That would destroy this town." "I know. So I developed an alternative plan. Expand production into new markets, invest in the facility, preserve the workforce. It requires more capital and patience, but it is viable." "Did the board approve it?" "Not yet. I am presenting tomorrow." "But Julia, there is something you need to understand. If I push this through, if I make Calloway Industries invest in Maple Ridge the way I am proposing, I have to follow through. I cannot do that from New York. I would need to be here, at least partially, overseeing the expansion, working with Robert's team, making sure it succeeds." Julia set down her tea carefully. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that nothing about this was supposed to happen. I was not supposed to fall in love with this town. I definitely was not supposed to fall in love with you. But I did both of those things, and now I have to decide what kind of person I want to be." "And what kind is that?" William stopped pacing and looked at her directly. "The kind who does not walk away from something real just because it is complicated." Julia crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and kissed him hard. "That is the correct answer." They spent the rest of the afternoon talking through possibilities. William would need to split his time between New York and Maple Ridge. It would not be easy, and there were 1,000 logistics to figure out. But for the first time in his adult life, William was making a decision based on what he wanted rather than what was efficient. The board meeting the next day was brutal. Marcus supported the plan, but several board members were skeptical. They questioned the financial models, the timeline, the deviation from Calloway Industries' usual strategy. William presented his case methodically, addressing every concern with data and projections. But in the end, what convinced them was something else. This is about positioning ourselves as a company that invests in American manufacturing, he said. Hartford manufacturing is not just an asset. It is an opportunity to show that profitable business and community investment are not mutually exclusive. We can be successful and responsible. That is the message we send to shareholders, to the market, to the country. The vote passed narrowly, with conditions and oversight requirements. But it passed. William called Julia immediately after. "We did it. The plan is approved." Her shriek of joy was so loud he had to hold the phone away from his ear. "Are you serious? Are you really serious?" "Completely serious. There is a lot of work ahead, but the jobs are safe. I am going to kiss you so hard when you get back here. I am counting on it." William spent the next 2 weeks in New York preparing for the transition. He hired a management team for Hartford manufacturing, set up systems for remote oversight, and began the delicate process of restructuring his own life. He put his apartment on the market. His assistant thought he was insane, but William had done the math. He could run Calloway Industries from anywhere with reliable internet. The company did not need him in Manhattan every day. It needed him making smart decisions, and apparently he made better decisions when he had space to breathe. When he finally returned to Maple Ridge, it was early November, and the landscape had transformed into autumn glory. He drove straight to Julia's store, walking in to find her arguing with a distributor on the phone about a delayed shipment. She hung up when she saw him, and her expression cycled through surprise, joy, and something deeper that made William's heart pound. "You are back," she said. "I am back. For how long? That depends." "How do you feel about taking a risk on a workaholic CEO who is trying to figure out how to have an actual life?" Julia came around the counter slowly. "I feel pretty good about it, actually, as long as he understands that life in Maple Ridge moves slower than Manhattan. I am counting on it." She kissed him, and it felt like coming home. The next few months were an exercise in adaptation. William moved into a house outside town with space for a home office. He commuted to New York twice a month for essential meetings but conducted most business remotely. The Hartford manufacturing expansion launched with surprising success, and Robert Hartford became a mentor of sorts, teaching William the art of running a business that valued people as much as profit. Julia was patient with his learning curve. She laughed when he tried to arrange her store inventory by category, and gently discouraged him from creating optimization spreadsheets for the farmer's market. She taught him to cook properly, to appreciate silence, to understand the rhythm of a small town where everyone knew your business but also cared about your well-being. They had their first real fight about 3 months in, when William got absorbed in a crisis at the company and missed a dinner she had planned. Julia was furious, not because he missed dinner but because he had reverted to old patterns, disappearing into work without communicating. "I cannot be with someone who only shows up when it is convenient," she said, her voice shaking. "I need to know that I matter, that we matter, even when things get hard." It was a wake-up call William needed. He apologized, not with words but with actions. He set boundaries around work hours. He hired another assistant to handle routine matters. He learned to delegate, to trust, to step back from the compulsion to control every detail. In return, Julia introduced him to a life he had not known was possible. Weekend hikes where they would not see another person for hours. Quiet evenings reading by the fire. Dinner parties with friends who cared about them as people, not as contacts or opportunities. The town accepted William gradually, measuring him not by his net worth, but by his contributions to the community. He joined the volunteer fire department because they needed someone with organizational skills. He sponsored the high school robotics team because the kids reminded him of his younger self, ambitious and hungry for opportunity. He learned everyone's names and shopping habits, much to Julia's delight. By spring, William could not imagine living any other way. He proposed on a Tuesday evening in Julia's garden, no elaborate plan or expensive venue, just the two of them and the flowers beginning to bloom. "I love you," he said, holding a ring he had designed specifically for her, simple and elegant. "I love the life we have built together. I want to keep building it for as long as you will let me." Julia cried, then laughed, then said yes while kissing him between words. They married in September, exactly 1 year after William first arrived in Maple Ridge. The wedding was at the community center, with the entire town invited. Sarah Chen made the cake. The same fiddle player from the potluck provided music. Robert Hartford gave a speech about how sometimes the best business decisions are the ones you make with your heart. William's mother flew in from Palm Beach, baffled by her son's choices, but charmed by Julia's warmth. Marcus served as best man and admitted during his toast that he had never seen William so happy or so relaxed. "I thought this place would drive him crazy," Marcus said. "Turns out it made him sane." Julia's mother cried through the entire ceremony, and her sister, who had been skeptical of William initially, admitted he had exceeded expectations. "You are good for her," she told William during the reception. "She is good for you. That is all that matters." Dancing with Julia that night, surrounded by people who had become his community, William thought about the man he had been a year ago. Successful, driven, and fundamentally lonely. He had built an empire but had forgotten why empires were built in the first place, to create something meaningful. To leave something behind that mattered. "What are you thinking about?" Julia asked, her head on his shoulder. "How everything I thought I wanted turned out to be wrong. And now I want this, every day for the rest of my life." Julia pulled back to look at him. "That can be arranged." They honeymooned locally, taking 2 weeks to explore Vermont properly. They stayed at bed and breakfasts, hiked mountain trails, visited farms and craft breweries. It was low-key and perfect, a reflection of the life they were building together. When they returned, William dove into work with renewed purpose. Hartford Manufacturing's expansion was exceeding projections. The company had become a model for sustainable growth, attracting attention from business schools and industry publications. William gave interviews about balancing profit and community investment, becoming an unlikely spokesperson for a more human approach to capitalism. Calloway Industries thrived under his revised leadership. The board was happy, shareholders were happy, and William was happy. It turned out that you could be successful without sacrificing everything else. Julia expanded the general store, adding an online component for her specialty products. Her honey and pasta gained a following, with orders coming from across the country. She hired additional staff, including a young woman from town who had dreams of business ownership and was learning from Julia the way Julia had learned from her father. "You are building something," William told her one evening as they reviewed her business plan together. "We are building something," Julia corrected. "None of this would have happened without you encouraging me to think bigger. You were already thinking big. I just provided spreadsheets," she laughed. "Your love language is spreadsheets, and somehow I find that endearing." 2 years into their marriage, Julia told William she was pregnant. He cried, which surprised both of them. The baby was not planned but was absolutely wanted, a new chapter in the life they were creating. Their daughter was born in May, a healthy baby girl with Julia's eyes and William's stubborn chin. They named her Rose after Julia's grandmother, and she became the most beloved baby in Maple Ridge's history, passed around at community gatherings like a treasured possession. Fatherhood changed William in ways he had not anticipated. He became even more protective of work-life boundaries, insisting on family time that was sacred and non-negotiable. He cut back further on travel, delegating more to his executive team. The company did not suffer. If anything, it benefited from his willingness to step back and let others lead. Marcus took over as COO and eventually CEO, with William transitioning to chairman of the board. It was the right move for everyone. Marcus loved the operational challenges, and William loved having time to actually live his life. He became a stay-at-home dad for Rose's first year, a choice that raised eyebrows in business circles, but made perfect sense to him. Julia ran the store while William handled diaper changes and nap schedules, and somehow it worked. "You are shockingly good at this," Julia said, watching him soothe Rose through a fussy evening. "I am good at understanding systems and adapting to new challenges." Babies are just small, unpredictable systems. "That is the most William Calloway thing you have ever said," he grinned. "I contain multitudes." Rose grew into a toddler, then a little girl, surrounded by the entire town's love and attention. She knew everyone by name, helped her mother at the store, and had her father's analytical mind combined with her mother's emotional intelligence. William sometimes thought about the life he had left behind, the penthouse apartment and the 70-hour work weeks and the constant pressure. He did not miss any of it. This life, with its farmers' markets and community potlucks and small daily joys, was richer than anything he had known before. "You ever regret it?" Julia asked him one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. Rose was asleep inside, and the world was quiet except for the sound of crickets. "Regret what? Leaving New York, changing everything. I know what you gave up." William took her hand, threading their fingers together. "I did not give up anything that mattered. I traded a life I was supposed to want for a life I actually wanted. That is not sacrifice. That is smart decision-making." Julia leaned her head on his shoulder. "I am glad you walked into my store that day. I am glad you did not throw me out when I tried to pay with a credit card." She laughed, and the sound filled William with contentment so complete it was almost overwhelming. He had spent his life chasing success, measuring himself against impossible standards, and he had been miserable. Now he measured his days in simpler terms. Did he make Julia smile? Was Rose happy and healthy? Was he contributing to something larger than himself by those metrics? He was the most successful person he knew. Hartford manufacturing continued to grow, adding a second shift and then a third. The expansion into renewable energy components positioned them perfectly as the market shifted. Other companies began approaching William for consulting, wanting to replicate his model of community-focused business growth. He took on selective projects, working with businesses that genuinely wanted to invest in their communities rather than just extract value. It became a second career, one that fulfilled him in ways pure profit never had. Julia's store became a destination, with people driving from neighboring towns to shop and experience the legendary customer service. She hired more staff, including several teenagers learning their first jobs. She treated them the way her father had treated her, with patience and high expectations, teaching them that work could be meaningful if you cared about doing it well. Their family expanded 3 years later with twin boys, rambunctious and loud and absolutely perfect. The house they had bought suddenly felt small, so they renovated, adding space for the growing family while keeping the character that made it home. William's mother moved to Vermont, buying a house in Maple Ridge because, she admitted, She wanted to be near her grandchildren. She became an unexpected fixture in town life, joining the garden club and hosting elaborate dinner parties that scandalized and delighted the locals in equal measure. Marcus and his wife visited regularly, escaping the city for weekends in the country. Their kids and William's kids became close, and Marcus admitted he was starting to understand the appeal. "Maybe when I retire," he said, looking out at the lake. "Maybe sooner than that," William suggested. "Life is short. Spend it somewhere that makes you happy." Says the man who left a fortune to sell honey in Vermont. "I did not leave a fortune. I brought it with me and invested it in something worthwhile." As Rose grew older, she asked William about his life before Maple Ridge. He told her stories about building Calloway Industries, about the challenges and triumphs, but also about the emptiness of success without connection. "I was good at business," he explained, "but I was not good at living. I had to come here and meet your mother to learn the difference." "So Mom taught you everything?" Rose asked, her eyes bright with interest. "Your mother taught me what matters. The rest I figured out along the way." Rose hugged him fiercely. "I am glad you figured it out, Dad. Me too, sweetheart, me too." On their 10th wedding anniversary, William and Julia returned to the community center where they had married. The town threw them a party, because that was what Maple Ridge did for people it had claimed as its own. There were speeches and laughter and dancing to the same fiddle player who had performed at their wedding. Robert Hartford, now in his 80s, pulled William aside. "I knew it would work," he said, his eyes twinkling. "When I made you come here, I knew you were the kind of man who would see what I saw. You manipulated me. I gave you an opportunity. You made the choice." William could not argue with that. He had made a choice, the best choice of his life, to open himself to possibilities beyond his narrow definition of success. Later that night, dancing with Julia while their children ran wild with their friends, William felt the kind of peace he had spent his entire life seeking without knowing it. "What are you thinking?" Julia asked, repeating the question she had asked on their wedding night. "That I found everything I needed in the last place I expected to look. Small towns have a way of surprising people. You have a way of surprising people." Julia smiled up at him. "I just showed you what was already there. You did the rest." "We did the rest," William corrected. "Everything good in my life exists because of us together." She kissed him, and the town cheered, and William thought about trajectories and choices and the strange alchemy that transforms strangers into partners, loneliness into belonging, ambition into purpose. He had been a CEO from the big city who thought he had all the answers. She had been a small town store owner who knew the questions he had not thought to ask. Together, they had built something neither could have created alone, a life of meaning, connection, and love. The clash had completed them, just as some wise part of him had suspected it would the moment. Julia Kinsley had laughed at his credit card and offered him a basil plant from her garden. William Calloway had spent his life conquering challenges, but his greatest achievement was not a business empire or a successful acquisition. It was learning to be present, to value people over profit, to measure success in smiles and sunsets and the sound of his children's laughter. He had found his home in Maple Ridge, in Julia's arms, in the rhythms of a life that prioritized being overdoing, and he had never been happier. The music played on, and William danced with his wife under string lights in a community center in a small Vermont town, surrounded by people who knew his name and cared about his happiness. His expensive suits hung in a closet he rarely opened. His Manhattan apartment was a distant memory. His former life felt like it had belonged to someone else entirely, because in all the ways that mattered, it had. William Calloway had been lost, though he had not known it at the time. Julia Kinsley had found him, or perhaps they had found each other. Two people whose differences complemented perfectly, whose clash of worlds had created something entirely new. Their children would grow up knowing both worlds, understanding that success came in many forms, that wealth meant more than money in the bank, that the richest life was one filled with love and purpose and community. As the party wound down and they gathered their sleepy children for the drive home, William looked back at the community center one last time. This building, this town, these people had given him everything. They had taught him how to live, not just exist, how to connect, not just achieve, how to love completely, without reservation or fear. Julia slipped her hand into his as they walked to the car, and William squeezed gently, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had built together. "I love you," he said, the words inadequate but true. "I love you too," Julia replied. Forever and always. Forever and always. In Maple Ridge, Vermont, surrounded by mountains and community and the life they had chosen together. William Calloway had found his happily ever after in the last place he had expected, with a woman who had shown him that the greatest success was living authentically, loving fully, and being present for every precious moment. They drove home through the quiet streets, past the general store and the town square, past the factory that had started everything, past the lake where William had spent his first confused night wondering what he had gotten himself into. Now he knew. He had gotten himself into the greatest adventure of his life, a journey from isolation to belonging, from ambition to fulfillment, from existing to truly living. And as he carried his sleeping daughter inside while Julia herded the twins, as he tucked them into beds and kissed foreheads and whispered good night, William Calloway understood with perfect clarity that he was the richest man in the world. Not because of his bank account or his company or his investments, but because he had learned what truly mattered. He had found love in the smile of a small-town woman who had seen past his defenses to the man he could become. He had found purpose in community and family. He had found peace in a life lived at a human pace, measured in moments rather than meetings. The CEO from the big city had met small-town her, and the clash had indeed completed them both, creating something beautiful and lasting and real. A love story written in farmers' markets and community potlucks, in late-night conversations and shared dreams, in the daily choice to choose each other over and over again. William fell asleep that night with Julia in his arms, the sound of his children breathing steadily down the hall, and gratitude filling his heart for the accident of geography and timing that had brought him to this place, to this woman, to this life. He had come to Maple Ridge to acquire a company. Instead, he had found himself, found love, found home. And that was worth more than any deal he had ever closed, any profit he had ever made, any success he had ever achieved. This was his legacy, not the buildings with his name on them, but the family he had built, the community he had joined, the life he had learned to live fully and well. This was everything. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything he had never known he needed, everything he had been missing, everything that made life worth living. William Calloway had finally come home.